Hello, and welcome to today's program. I'm Diane Okonski, the host for today's presentation. Before we get started, I want to thank the INLUS members and donors for their contributions that make our webinars, classes, scholarships, and grants possible. If you are not yet a member of the INLUS, please consider joining us. Information can be found at www.inlus.org. We encourage you to submit your questions today using Zoom's Q&A feature, and we will answer as many as possible at the end of Erin's presentation. Today's program is being recorded and will be available on the INLUS website and our YouTube channel. Tonight, I am pleased to have with us Dr. Erin Kennedy. Erin is an associate professor in the Department of Atmospheric Sciences at the University of North Dakota. His research focuses on observing and understanding hazardous weather events, such as blizzards and severe storms. He spent last winter in the Westfjords of Iceland as a Fulbright Scholar, studying the weather around Ísafjörður. And tonight he's going to share with us what it was like to live and work there. So welcome, Erin. Very happy to have you with us tonight, and I look forward to hearing more about your work and the Westfjords. So I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Diane, and thanks to both you and Doug for setting this up. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully that's showing up okay. So if you want to sum up the West Fjords in one picture, this is it. It's beautiful. And I was incredibly fortunate to be able to travel here and live and work in this area of Iceland for a whole academic year. And so that's what this story today is about. I'm going to talk about how I ended up here, because that's a story in itself, and then what it was like working there, and then just living there, because it's truly at the end of the world. But before that, I just wanted to thank a few groups. First of all, I want to thank the Fulbright Commission. We'll talk a little bit about the Fulbright program, but they're the ones that allowed for the funding for me to go there. And some of their funding came from the National Science Foundation, who supports a lot of our science projects. My university, who allowed me to go on developmental leave to take away from my teaching duties and do fun stuff. Not that teaching isn't fun. And also Veðurstofa Iceland, which is the Icelandic Met Office, and that was my host institution in the Westfjords. And so just a little bit about myself. Diane gave a great introduction, but basically I'm a meteorologist or a climate scientist. And as she mentioned, I focus on hazardous weather, and a lot of it comes down to observing it. And so we were trying to collect observations of winter weather. I got a picture of a blizzard here. Guess what? You can't really see anything, but that's in Minnesota. Studying severe storms like hailstorms, tornadoes, and so on. And a lot of my work involves putting instruments into these hazardous environments, collecting data, and then we want to use that data to improve our weather models so that someday in the future, when the TV meteorologist tells you what's going to happen, he's not wrong and you're not mad at them. Besides being a scientist, I'm also a photographer. I love cycling and biking, so like doing a lot of outdoor stuff. And then I'm also a dad of three wonderful girls, and so they also factor into the story I'm going to tell tonight. So I guess the big question is, how the heck did I end up in Iceland? And this is probably one of the few times in my life that I actually like planned out things over multiple years. And this really started just on a whim. The year was 2021. We're coming out of the COVID era. As a university professor, any educator, it was a nightmare doing like online asynchronous learning, hybrid teaching. Travel plans were disrupted, and I had travel credits left over. And then a friend of mine from college, Ellen Bjork Jónsdóttir, she was a classmate of mine from Oklahoma, a native Icelander, and she is basically the lead hazard meteorologist for the Icelandic Met Office in Iceland. And when Fagradalsfjall erupted in 2021, she posted this picture on the left, and this picture single-handedly said, you know what, I need to go visit Iceland. After all this trial and tribulation with COVID, I wanted to see lava. I'm a meteorologist, but I'm also an earth scientist. And so the stars aligned. I traveled to Iceland, and I was only there for like a little over 3 days. It was wild. Like we got into the country, we had to get tested for COVID, and then next day I had to get tested again so I could leave the country. But the weather cooperated. Got to see the volcano, did a quick loop of the Golden Circle, and then was back to the United States. But during that time, I got to meet with Ellen, and then we started talking shop and talking meteorology, and quickly realized that a lot of this winter weather research I was doing back home might have some applications in Iceland, and it just sort of got the ball rolling. And so 2022 comes around, so a year later, and there was a conference that was actually delayed by COVID. They got pushed back to 2022. It was about the cryosphere, so studying snow and ice. Took place in Reykjavik. Ellen was going to it, so I found a way to go, and then she allowed for me to give a talk at the Icelandic Met Office. I also fit in a bike trip since I like cycling, and after learning about what avalanches do in parts of Iceland, I biked around Westfjords, and this monument on the right is an avalanche memorial in Patreksfjörður, which is on sort of the southern edge of Westfjords, and it just really sort of struck a note with me, like being a meteorologist in the United States, studying hazardous weather, seeing that there's this human impact in Iceland. And after talking with the Met Office, we decided that, you know what, I think there is an avenue that we could have some research done over here if I could find the funding to do it. And then, of course, the question is, well, where does the funding come from? And that's where the Fulbright program comes into play. And so I was selected as a Fulbright Scholar, but there's also Fulbright Fellows, which are students at various points in their studies. And this program originated in the 1940s. It was proposed by U.S. Senator William Fulbright, who's pictured here on the right. And basically, what he said is, the Fulbright program's mission is to bring a little more knowledge, a little more reason, and a little more compassion in the world affairs, and thereby increase the chance that nations will learn at last to live in peace and friendship. We're not quite there yet, but the Fulbright program has been in place since 1946. And so, as a scholar or as a fellow, we basically serve as a scientific or cultural ambassador between the U.S. and other countries, not just Iceland. There's Fulbright commissions and posts all over the world. And so this process of becoming a Fulbright Scholar, it's like a competitive review process. And so you put this proposal together that says, hey, here's the science I want to do and why I think this is worthy of supporting. And it's reviewed in the United States. A lot of that is just, is this scientifically sound? Is this something that we want one of our citizens to go overseas to share their knowledge and learn from others? And then once it passes the U.S. round of reviews, then it gets reviewed by the host country. And so the host country has a panel of people that review these proposals and decide, would this be a worthy project for our country? And so I was fortunate enough that both groups decided that, yeah, this sounds like a good project. I'll talk a little more about what I was doing in a second. But basically what this program does is it provides for living expenses for the participants. And so I still had a mortgage back home. I still had a car, insurance, everything else back home. What this program did is it allowed me to pay rent in Iceland, rent a car while I was over there, and then have some money for food and whatnot. And then my salary basically came from my institution. So that's why I had to thanks for University of North Dakota for allowing me to leave, giving me salary support while I'm off learning about new things in the world. So basically the goals of my Fulbright were, I talked about the hazard weather research I was doing. I've been doing a lot of instrument design, and all of my testing had been in the United States. In North Dakota, it's a very dry, cold climate during the winter, but the question is, well, how would my instruments work in a more Arctic maritime climate? So in an area where you're near the ocean, where it's like a lot of water, there's a lot of liquid, a lot of rain, and so on. And I felt that Iceland would be a great place to test this. And so and for the purpose of instrument design, this would be the ultimate test. And then even better, it seemed like there is the potential that these instruments could be useful for natural hazards forecasting in Iceland. They get these avalanches, and we wanted to be able to monitor the conditions leading up to avalanches, and also deploy some other instrumentation to see if some of the mitigation measures they're doing to try and prevent avalanches are actually working. And so it was funded, and then I moved to Iceland. And so my Fulbright went from September 1st to May 1st. So just but a little over 8 months or so. It was one academic year. I was fortunate enough to bring my oldest daughter with, and so she did eighth grade in Iceland, which was amazing. And it was just to get from one country to another, it was a bunch of paperwork and logistics. And so we actually became temporary citizens of Iceland. We got Kennitala, which is like their social security number, had a bank account, we got paid in Icelandic currency. And really, I quickly learned this saying theoretis, which is basically things are going to work out, and that's what you have to go with. And I remember one of the first days we were there, we had filed our paperwork, we thought everything was set, and then a couple weeks go by, and the school contacted us and said, "Hey, Zoe doesn't exist in our system." And then it took a bunch of phone calls all over the country. We sorted out with the registrar's office, but it all worked out in the end. And that's really is like how their country runs, which is pretty amazing. And for someone who doesn't really plan too much other than for this project, it just sort of resonated with me. And that was sort of like the theme of the whole experience. So moving to Iceland for 8 months or whatever, what the heck do you bring with you? Well, as a cyclist, I had to bring my bicycle with, and then I had two instrument cases, which are those yellow Pelican Air contraptions there. We had two full suitcases full of our clothes, two duffels full of more clothes, and then backpacks full of our laptops and other technology stuff that we needed to survive over there. So just a little bit about the Westfjords or Vestfjorda in the Icelandic language. It's really interesting part of Iceland that commonly gets neglected by people that tour to Iceland. It's one of the oldest geologic regions of Iceland, along with Eastfjords, and so the rocks there are some of the oldest in the country. The total population of the region, which I've circled in red here, less than 8,000. So that's like less than a lot of small towns in the United States. And up to the 20th century, it was pretty much cut off from mainland Iceland. And because of that, their economy is pretty much based on the sea. There's tons of fishing, whether it's wild caught fish or farm fish, transport, all sorts of interesting maritime stuff happening in the West Fjords. And even today, with all the technology and roads and stuff that we have, it's still challenging to get in and out of West Fjords. There was points during our trip there that you just couldn't leave the area. You couldn't even leave like the mountain we were on because the roads were closed because of either avalanches or snowfall or landslides or all sorts of stuff. And so you actually have to make an effort to get there. And so as a result, it tends to be like one of the last places it seems like that tourists visit Iceland, unless they come in by a cruise ship and they have a port in Ísafjörður there where they can come in. And I thought this picture on the right just sort of exemplifies that because you commonly see come to Iceland, do the ring road, and they don't even have a marking in Westfjords. It's like, oh, yeah, you don't need to go there. There's nothing there, which is absolutely untrue. It's amazing, amazing areas. Hopefully, this talk will show. So during this talk, I'm going to show a variety of different places. I thought I'd zoom in and kind of show like where I basically spent 95% of my time in Iceland. We lived in sort of this northern edge of West Fjords. The area to the north is actually just a few summer homes in this nature preserve called Hornstrandir, and so there's really nothing up there. Like we're the northern edge of Iceland, or at least the northwestern edge of Iceland, and that's where the people are. There's no one north of us. And so the main town and the largest town in the West Fjords is Ísafjörður, which is this red dot down here in the corner. It's really notable because it's a spit of land that they've basically added land to over time to accommodate the growth of the town. And then I lived in this small town called Nistila, which is just around the mountain. And it just worked out that a rental home was available there. It's a summer home for a family that lives farther south in Iceland, and the idea of having someone stay there the winter and watch it was appealing to them, and it just worked out. And then finally, there's a couple places I had instruments installed. One was Blungavik, which is sort of like the westernmost town of West Fjords, one of the original fishing villages in like all of Iceland. And so there's a weather station up against the mountain that I had some instruments there. I built these instruments that basically take pictures of snowflakes. We had a couple there. I was testing different designs to see how they'd work. And then it was co-located with the weather station. And then about 10 miles away, over a fjord, is a mountain called Eyrarfjall, which is just above Flateyri. And Flateyri is also a really nice town. It's a lot smaller than Eastfjords, but it's known for some pretty significant avalanches over the years that have caused loss of life. And so they have mitigation measures. You know, like in the United States, you commonly hear of like dikes to protect flooding, like we have in my town in Grand Forks. There, they build dikes to deflect the avalanches around the town. And so the snow, of course, originates on top of these mountains, and they had put in some snow fences, and they were curious like how well these snow fences working. And so I brought some instruments. The Icelandic Met Office had some instruments. We basically tag teamed to create an experiment to see how well those snow fences are working. And we'll see some picture of those in a bit. And so, yeah, I went from no terrain to lots of terrain, from the prairie to the mountains. Um, I love North Dakota. I've lived in North Dakota longer than anywhere else in my life. But sometimes it gets kind of depressing, like how little like hiking, like actual terrain and stuff there is. That was not a problem in Iceland. In the town of Nistro, which is this little black arrow, you can't even make it out. It's so small. There was a little hiking trail that went out from it and went 3 miles down the valley. And at the end of the workday, you could just start walking. And then I commonly got in trouble because I started walking. I didn't know when to stop. And then I looked at the light. I was like, uh-oh, it's about to get dark. And then it's like running back down the mountain before the light goes away. And so that was amazing to go from not having to make any effort to go hiking and get outdoors. It was like literally out the back door. I'm just going to show some pictures of the towns in the area. This is Isafjordur, and so this is that spit of land I talked about. There's no traffic lights. There's one roundabout. At 5 o'clock, you might have to wait 3 cars. Like that's the amount of traffic there is in the community. The cruise port, they've been working on the dock. It's sort of on the far side of this picture, but the cruise ships will line up over here. It's hard to see, but just to the right of that, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that's where the airport is. There is one runway there. You can only fly in if you can see the runway, and commonly what happens is the winds are aligned in a way that you can't just come in out of the main body of water. And so the plane flies in along the mountain and they do a 180 and then land on this runway. It's probably one of the most it's the most exciting flight I've ever been on. And it's pretty common that you get thrown about because there's mountains and the winds interact with the mountains, a lot of turbulence, and they'll get on the PA and say, "Hey, it's about to get bumpy." And then you get bumped a bit and then you land. And I thought it was amazing to be on a plane where everyone's taking pictures. Like if the weather was nice, it didn't matter if you're a visitor or local, everyone's taking pictures of the area because it's so beautiful. Yeah, so largest town in the area, but still a little less than 3,000 people in the immediate community. But it's also quite old. There are some buildings that still stand from the 1700s out here on the like the far end of the spit. There's a really famous fish restaurant there. That's one of the oldest buildings, and there's a museum there. And during our stay there, we had a crazy windstorm, and one of the buildings that actually cracked part of the frame, and they had to repair it. Moving on, this is the town I lived in, Nistila. So it's just about 2 miles or so, 2, 3 miles around the mountain. It's only about 200 people there. There's no stores. There's a community center. There used to be a school, but the school actually got blown off the foundation, so no one goes to school there anymore. Nistila is known for one of the most deadly avalanches in Icelandic history. This mountain on the west is prone for avalanches, and this whole left hand area of the village now is basically summer homes because it's not safe to live there during the winter. And when the avalanche happened in 1910, it actually swept some of the houses that aren't here anymore out into the ocean. They were actually rescuing people from the water. So pretty crazy. I lived in this, it's kind of hard to see, but this little black house right here in the middle. Um, since I worked at the Icelandic Met Office, I knew where to look at the avalanche maps, and there had never been an avalanche there, so I didn't really feel unsafe or anything. My middle child, when I told her we were moving to Iceland, or at least my oldest daughter and I were, she's like, "Well, aren't you going there to study avalanches?" Like, yeah, we are. She's like, "Well, I don't want to go. There's avalanches." Once she visited, I think she changed her tune and realized, "Oh, this is a pretty cool place. I probably should have come here and lived." But fortunate she was able to at least visit. This is Blungavik, and so this is one of the oldest fishing villages in Iceland. If you read about it, it basically says that it was formed in the settlement area, has a population about 1,000. It was kind of interesting talking with people from here and Isafjords. There's sort of like some low-key competition between the two towns. Apparently, there had been some history where they're trying to like combine the villages, but they made sure they had at least 1,000 residents, so they would stay separate from Isafjords. But overall, of course, everyone is really friendly in Iceland. And in the foreground is this recreated fishing village, like the original fishing villages were in Iceland. And so, if you're ever visiting area, it's a pretty cool area to see like what these establishments looked like back in the day. I just knowing the Icelandic weather, it amazes me the boats they went out in and caught fish and got back to shore. But some people didn't, and every single town seemed to have a memorial for fishermen that didn't return. And so that's something that resonates through all the communities. So, what was living in Iceland like? Well, it was crazy. Like just the first 3 weeks, I think after the first 3 weeks, my daughter and I were just like, "Holy cow, what was that?" Like in the first week, we moved up to Eastfjords like roughly on September 1st after we went through some orientation stuff. And then the first day, I was gonna to bike into town to work. So I like bike commuting, crazy winds. Like it was the hardest bike ride I've ever had because I was biking into the winds. And it turned out we actually had wind gusts that were over like hurricane force. And uh, get to the office, and then everyone's in the window. No, there's no work being done. Why? Well, the winds broke some sailboats loose from their moorings, and they're crashing against the rock. And then it was the whole town's watching the search and rescue get out there and rescue these boats. There was actually a student in the building I was in that got thrown off their bike and had to be flighted out to the capital because they're injured. Like the winds are nothing to joke around with. Like the weather in Iceland was crazy. So we got past that. Well, surely things will get quieter. Well, nope. The next week was the polar bear. And so every once in a while, a polar bear will find its way from Greenland down to Iceland. Maybe it rides an iceberg, swims the rest of the way or whatever. And sure enough, one turned up in Westfjords, one fjord over from where we were living, like just on the other side of the mountain in that picture in Istula. And it ended up basically trapping a lady that was still in her summer home in her house, and then they ended up having to kill the polar bear because it like jumped out at them and it was problematic. And so then the rescue helicopter came and they picked up the polar bear and brought it back to the university to learn more about what its diet was and whatnot. And then a week after that, it was still cruise season, and then they had a tour bus that caught fire in one of the tunnels. So one of the big things in West Fjords are the tunnels that allow you to get to some of the towns. And this tour bus caught fire in the tunnel. Luckily, got out of the tunnel before it totally went up in flames. They evacuated everybody. No one was hurt, but this was a huge hoopla in the community because the first thing is the tunnel that it caught fire in was one of the like older tunnels, and it's only like 1.5 lanes. Like you actually have to, if you're going one direction, you have to wait for cars to go around. And this brought up a petition, and everyone's, trying to figure out ways that they can build a new tunnel to make it safer because of the amount of tourism traffic they're getting. Now, besides all the natural stuff happening, work was also an adventure. And so at the beginning of my time there, it was basically a frantic couple weeks to get instruments set up before winter sets in. And so we took this old trail up to, on top of Erafjall to install our sensors. The top of the mountain was rock. So we were literally digging up rocks and a little bit of dirt and getting the poles in to put the instruments in. And so this picture on the right, that's actually flat area. You can see the avalanche barrier. Um, it turned out that the avalanche barrier worked pretty well, but they had a recent avalanche around 2020. It actually deflected the avalanche into the harbor and it took out their fishing fleet. And then also rode up the other side and buried a teenager in the house, and luckily they're okay. And so all this work on the right-hand side was them putting in additional almost like dragon's teeth, like you'd see to block tanks to like slow down the avalanche before it would hit that wall. And so we finished up the installs in October, early October. We had our first snow by then. Snow wasn't too deep, so it wasn't a big deal. But you can see example this snow fence. There's actually two of them. The other one was just off the screen here. And then there's a little black dot there. That was one of our instrument stations. And so that's supposed to represent the disturbed air that's been impacted by the fence. And then we put another weather station with these snowdrift sensors off to the side that would be unprotected. And then the goal was compare the two stations and see how much is the blowing snow and drifting snow being impacted. And if they're working well, we would see less blowing snow behind the fence in the areas that would eventually turn into avalanches. But needless to say, it's amazing when you can combine adventure, aka hiking or riding an ATV or whatever, with the actual work. Like that was quite enjoyable. And the sunset was just it was phenomenal with the fresh snow and a little bit of blowing snow. It was just amazing. Then November came, and then we got the rain. And so you never know what Mother Nature is going to throw at you. The winter that we stayed there, it turned out was a little abnormal in that we had a lot of warm-ups. And so all that snow that we got in October ended up melting along with a lot of rain. And then the road between Eastfield and Eastfield ended up getting buried in mud. And so the way I found out about this was my daughter called me and said, "Hey, Dad, can you come get me? The bus didn't come." And the bus was kind of a unique situation that we thought we had the bus schedule figured out, but then it seemed like they'd always mix it up on us, and then we'd have to scramble to figure out what the bus schedule actually was. And so when she mentioned the bus didn't come, I didn't really think much of it because this had happened before. I drive around the mountain, see the line of cars, and see that the road isn't there anymore. And I called her up and said, "Well, Zoe, I got bad news. You're not getting home. You're going to be stuck in town." And like Iceland, things work out. I called my coworkers up and like, "Oh, not a big deal. Zoe can stay with us. We'll have a slumber party with her." And by the next day around noon, they had the road cleared and she was able to get back home. And she had a story to tell all of her friends about the day she couldn't get back from school. And that I think just really it's just a good example of the Iceland mentality that when things happen, you take care of it, you take care of each other, and it was really refreshing to see the community come together to support people when this type of stuff happens because it happens routinely. So what else was I doing? I mentioned these cameras I brought. The official name of these things is Oscar. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but basically they're these custom instruments I built. It's a high-speed camera paired with a strobe light and actually takes pictures of the snowflakes. And when you design an instrument from scratch, there's always the question of like, well, are there better designs out there? And so one of the goals of this project was to try two different lighting designs and see which one works better for detecting snow and blowing snow and rain and so far and so on. And so we set up a pair of these in Blungavik. It was like it was like a little sort of park in the neighborhood. We set them up there at the weather station where they had power, and then I would routinely drive out there and collect information from them, maintain them, and so on. So these are some example images from the snowflake cameras. If you go to Iceland and you feel that like hard, sort of like sleet-like stuff hit you, they call it hail. In English, in the United States, we call it grapple, but it's basically like a snowflake that's been coated in a lot of liquid water, and that's what these little white balls are. But then, we ended up with these pristine snowflakes, these little hexagonal ice crystals, and part of what we're trying to do is look at here's the type of snow that fell, or was there grapple or hail in there? Was there rain? How does this impact the stability of the snow layers? And is this something that would be useful for the avalanche forecasting? Because of the amount of rain that we had this winter, we didn't really accumulate that much snowpack. And so this is something that we're leaving one of the instruments there for next winter. I'll go back in September with a couple of my students to maintain it and then get it ready. And not that we want conditions for avalanches, but if they happen, we'll get the data we need to see whether this would be something useful for the Icelandic Met Office. And so over the course of statistics, we imaged over 21 million particles. I say particles because it wasn't always precipitation. We ended up capturing some pictures of midge flies. So this is interesting because I hypothesized that I could see insects with my camera systems. I'd actually put in a proposal to NSF to like expand the utility for them to that. And then we ended up getting the first data that proved that we could in Iceland. And now this is turning into a potential collaboration in other parts of Iceland where they get midge flies. On the right here is Hunslapadrifa, roughly how you say it, but basically it translates to snow the size of a dog's paw. It's like the largest snowflakes, they hit you and you're soaked. And so we had the largest snowflake we imaged was almost about an inch in diameter, just a little under that. And then we got all sorts of rain and drizzle. That's the stuff is down here, and then everything in between. It was amazing with the mountains, just how fast the precipitation would change from rain to snow and back and forth. Okay. So Iceland within the first month basically gave me all the conditions I needed to see how well my instruments work. We had at the field site multiple times of hurricane force winds. The strongest wind gust we had was 100 miles per hour, which is crazy. And usually when you had the winds that strong, it wasn't dry. There was precipitation mixed into it. And so quickly learned that the heaters that were in the instruments They work pretty well in North Dakota because our snow is dry. In Iceland, not quite as well. And so one of the things we'll be doing for this upcoming year is putting some additional heating on the lens to try and prevent this from happening as much. But even though this happened, this is sort of the rarity. And so like 90, roughly 95% of the time, the cameras worked quite well. And another 5%, that's what we want to fix. And so that's why we go back and do this again next year. I won't travel there for the whole winter, but at least get them set up. So what was work life like? With Icelandic Met Office, I was in what's called the Snøflóðasetu, which basically is like the avalanche forecast office. It was amazing. I don't know if I've ever like resonated so much with like the workers there. It was incredibly welcoming. It was a very active work environment. Everyone loved the outdoors. I think that's sort of a common thing in Westfjords is if you're going to live and suffer there, you got to appreciate the outdoors and do a lot of things out there. Iceland makes do with who they have. And so it was in the United States, if you were to look at like one of our forecast offices, everyone would be a trained meteorologist. In Iceland, everyone had a very diverse set of backgrounds. So we had people that were more in like hazard mitigation, engineers, meteorology background, disaster response, and they all found themselves to this forecast office. And in a way, I think that was actually really good because it gives a really diverse set of opinions that help towards a common goal of protecting people from avalanches. I was also amazed at how much interaction there is in such a small area, just how often we have people coming in and visiting and saying, "Hey, we saw something, what's going on?" Talking about the conditions, whether it is from landslides or potential avalanches. Like basically the Icelandic form of the Department of Transportation people were there, so the plow drivers. We had student groups there from the community, people that deal with disaster response, all sorts of groups. And then in the work environment itself was great. It was like they would ring a bell and it was Lake Fimi, which is basically gymnastics, I think is the translation. And then we would pull out the yoga mats and we'd be doing yoga poses and crunches and all sorts of stuff. And then we're all sweating and then we feel better afterwards and then back to work. We did this garage walk, this Biskarlot or something like that, and we basically went to every person's house during the day, and they made snacks and had drinks, and we just built up a camaraderie and learning more about where everyone lived and what they're up to. We had the most crazy fire drill I've ever been part of. It was like freezing drizzle outside, and I don't know if anyone's ever watched Office Space where uh, Dwight does like the fire drill. It's basically what happened. The guy who was in charge of safety made an alarm go off on his phone. He's like, "We're doing a fire drill." And then they opened up this window that I didn't even know was a door. They pop out this ladder, and now we're climbing down the side of the building in freezing drizzle. And I was like, this would never happen in America because of like liability reasons, even if that was like your way to get out of the building. So I was taking pictures and Harpa, who was my boss there, is like, "You don't have to do this." I was like, "No, I need to do this." And then the other thing is we had Yolamato, which is like Christmas meal, and they just set the meal up in the office. And we had this amazing lunch, and everyone brought stuff, and we helped contribute to it. We had like weekly soup lunches, and it was just a very welcoming environment. So as far as like practical life goes, was like just like living there outside of work. You know, the town is only 3,000 people. It has some stores, had two grocery stores, a bonus, which is sort of like the discount store in Iceland, and then a Netto, which is like one of the smaller grocery stores. It had all the necessities, but it's very common for people to take trips down to the Reykjavik for shopping runs. Or if you knew someone going down there, you commonly ask them, "Hey, can you bring something back or transport something left and right?" I mean, they had Facebook groups for everything, and one of them was just, "I'm either coming or going from Reykjavik. Do you need a ride? I'll split gas or bringing something back or whatever." Really, the toughest part of living there was just getting used to the store hours, which were quite limited. The grocery stores all closed by 7 p.m. When we first got there, the sun set quite late still. You know, we got there September 1st. I want to say sunset was still like 10 something. And I, we're just busy doing stuff. And then all of a sudden it's like, "Oh, it's 7:30. Oh, we probably should figure out what we're doing for dinner. Oh, grocery store's closed. Well, I guess we're going to make do with what we have." You know, there's some restaurants and bars and stuff that were also open, you know, later, but the stores had very limited hours. And then like there is no Amazon there. There's some online stores and they have some pretty unique ways of getting goods in and out of Westfjords. But there was like one bike part I ordered, and then it turned out that it got stuck on a container ship coming from Europe, and it took a month to get there. So that was sort of the extreme of like how long it takes to get stuff. And I think overall, I think what I came away from the experience of this was just a great way to realize like how little you really need to live and be happy if you like the outdoors. If you're willing to go outside in all types of weather and enjoy it, uh, I thought Westwards was an amazing place to be. Food in the West Fjords, I thought overall quality was high, especially seafood, baked goods, dairy, meat. Produce at the end of the world is tough. Like the fruit was, it was pretty dismal at times and quite expensive. That said, we ate a lot of bananas. Those seem to be stocked year round. When oranges showed up around Christmas, that was a big deal. And my colleagues told me a lot about how that was like their Christmas gift back in the days when they get an orange. Like that was a big deal in Iceland. And so it makes you realize like how far they've come. But also because there's such a limited selection of stuff there, when something new shows up, you get quite excited. And my daughter be like, "Hey, did you see what's at Netto?" Because Netto is next to the school, and they could like leave campus and go there. And I was like, "No, I didn't." She'd come home with snacks or whatever. Lots of seafood, the freshest seafood you'll ever have in your life. I ate more fish than probably my whole life. I'm not really a fish person. I am now, although I'm probably a Westfjords fish person or Icelandic fish person. The fish that we get in North Dakota, not really my thing. The lamb is great. You know, there's all the whole thing about the Icelandic free range lamb, amazing but spendy. So it's more of a luxury type item that you get once in a while. Eating out is like, really expensive, but there's no tipping, and you learn that a lot of places offer lunch specials. So if you're going to eat out, you do it for lunch, and you can save quite a bit of money. Here's just some examples of some of the more exotic foods we had. On the left here, this was cured lamb, not hangakjöt, like the smoked lamb. This is actually cured lamb, which I thought was delicious. We got into making banana pepperoni pizza. This started off as a joke, I thought, but one of Zoe's classmates said, "Well, I like bananas on my pizza," and we thought that must be a translation error. It must be pineapple. Actually, we ended up going to pizzeria in Reykjavik at one point, and they had a banana pizza on the menu. My daughter and I tried it, and we were hooked. Like it is the bee's knees. Throw some hot honey on there, amazing. And like basically after that, we perfected our banana pepperoni pizza just over the weeks. Each week we'd spend one day. That was what we were having for dinner. We just perfected it. Tried horse meat. That's not really a common thing in Iceland, but it is available, especially during their festivals and like Thorabot in like February and stuff. It's good meat, not something I would normally get. I had to try it because it was there. And then on the right here, we have there's some pate and then pickled herring, and there's some salmon. All that was excellent. I'm not a salmon person, but the pickled herring was amazing. Of course, all the rye breads were amazing. And then, of course, you have the really exotic foods. For the fermented shark, had to try that. Don't know if I would try it again. I survived it, but it's pretty rough. I had pickled whale blubber. I didn't get a picture of that, unfortunately. That came from the marine research scientists that were in the center with me, but that was interesting. And then, of course, the sweets. Iceland, it's amazing anyone even has teeth in that country with how much they love their sugar. On the left, this is Zoe with a cake she made in home ec at school, like literally came home with a whole cake. It was amazing. Like they would teach them all the Icelandic recipes. Boladaga, so it's like cream bun day, amazing. Probably the best donut like pastry things I've ever had. And then they love their candy and they love their themed candy for the different holidays. And so they had one of the candy bars had a Christmas version, Yellowcut, which is like Christmas cat. That was really good. And then this Pretty Boy Choco is kind of like a manufactured rap artist in Iceland. My daughter thought it was pretty funny, but I thought it was funny that they turned them into an Easter egg. And the Easter egg, that's something you get. And the Easter eggs are a big deal there. Like they came out and it was like every week was like, wow, I didn't know Easter eggs get bigger and more chocolatey and whatever. I was amazed at how much was going on in the West Fjords, not just science, but just like arts and community. The blend of a lot of locals, international transplants, and it felt like we were all working towards the common good of like making the community great. It was weird being in a place where many have heard of North Dakota. Like in the United States, usually it's like, oh, you're from South Dakota. No, no, North Dakota. And they confuse it. In Iceland, a lot of people had connections to North Dakota or knew about it, which is amazing. I had people like, hey, I've been to Mountain, North Dakota. And you're like, well, yeah, because the deuce is there. And I knew why they were there, but still, it was surprising to be in a small country and like people have been to rural parts of North Dakota. And overall, I found it intellectually and artistically invigorating. There's all sorts of art going on, music festivals, film festivals, art displays, great community for learning Icelandic. As Gifam Íslenska sends, as like they'd have these gatherings at different establishments where locals will like speak slowly with you. You could work on your Icelandic because it is a difficult language to learn. I think I'm going really long here, but the rest of the slides are mainly just pictures and stuff. I thought the other thing worth noting is just what it was like living in a town that is based on tourism during the summer, and then the tourism goes away, and you see like both tales. Some of these cruise ships that came into town, like this Norwegian Prima, literally double the population of the town, and so they would close off certain roads so people don't get run over. uh Zoe at their school, she'd have to walk to gym class because the gym was like in a different part of the village, and then tourists would come up and be like, what's it like living in Westfjords? And she'd laugh because it's like, well, I've literally been here a couple weeks and I'm getting asked about what it's like to live here. But when they realized she spoke English, then she got even more questions, like really good English, and she thought that was pretty funny. And then during when the tourism season is over, there's a lot more like meal and bar specials around town, which is kind of nice when you're living there. Overall, schooling, I thought for Zoe in eighth grade is amazing. I feel like the United States is a lot more fact-based, prepare for standardized exams. Iceland's the exact opposite. I felt like it was more like learning to be a citizen, learning to live life. I already talked about the stuff that she cooked. It was like every day during the cooking class, she came home with something crazy. Every class does this hike up a mountain, and hiking trails in Iceland is a loose term. Zoe reported more as we walked up the mountain and walked down the other side. There was not a trail. But what happens is that the Grundskole, which is like 10 grades, each grade does a different mountain. And then when they graduate from the school, they've hiked the 10 major like peaks or whatever in the area. Got to go to a school play. That was fun to see. I loved how active outdoors they were. They had like, bike to school days and stuff. And it was a lot of practical knowledge. So in science, they're learning about all the mushrooms in the countryside and like what can you harvest and eat. And it was pretty amazing. So the rest of the talk is just basically pictures of cool places that if you ever find yourself in Westfjords, you should stop by and see. I spent a lot of time biking and hiking and learning to cross country or trying to learn how to cross country ski. I just spent a lot of time outdoors, regardless of what the weather was doing. Vega was it used to be the road between Blongavik and Nistala, and then basically there were so many avalanches and rock slides that it just wasn't safe anymore. And so now it's this road falling into the sea. That upper right picture is actually a bit of a leftover part of an avalanche that went over it. And now everyone gets through to the towns through the tunnels, but it's now a common place to go trail running, go biking, hiking, and so on. There was Svalvolgar, something like that. I have a really hard time pronouncing this one. This is basically a famous road down by Thingeyri, which is a little farther south. Basically, this farmer is like, you know what, I'm building a road to where my farm is, and he just got the construction equipment and just started digging in the mountain and built this road. And now it's this road that loops around the outside of this like peninsula, and you can only ride it or do 4x4 on it at certain times of the day because at high tide, like the road's buried. So off there in the distance, like that would literally be underwater. So that was a fun bike adventure. I think the plan, they're supposed to have a solar eclipse. Well, they're going to have a solar eclipse in this area next year. I think this is the place to watch it from because the fewest amount of people will be able to get in there because you're either on bike or 4x4 or hiking or whatever. Holtsfjord, this is Holt Beach. This is just at the end of the fjord from Flateyri. Amazingly long beach, especially when the tide was low. And it was just really great to go out there, bike, hike, look for shells, whatever. Ran into a local there and I trying my Icelandic, and I learned her whole life story about what happened when the avalanches occurred in 1990 and how they tried to evacuate the kids. And then she took my picture, and he says, "Well, the only way you're going to get this picture is to come to my cafe that's open in the summer, Soul Coffee." And so, unfortunately, I wasn't there while the cafe was open, but she did that on purpose. So now I got to go back during the summer and collect this picture she took of me, apparently. Dynjandi, this is the most famous waterfall in Iceland, arguably one of the coolest waterfalls in Iceland. It's not just straight down, it kind of flows down at an angle, which is really neat. And it's actually a collection of waterfalls below it. And so you get to each little waterfall, like, oh, wow, this is the picture. And then you get the next one, like, oh, there's another picture. Amazing. In the fall, there's berry picking, and so these are my three kids out berry picking on the mountain, and you just walk up there, pick berries, and then turn it into a component of your meal. That was a lot of fun. The Northern Lights, really lucky to go during a solar maximum when the sun was active, and the amount of nights I saw Northern Lights was amazing. Basically, if there weren't clouds, you're seeing the Northern Lights. So it was like only a handful of days that we didn't see the Northern Lights if it was clear. We also had these things called polar stratospheric clouds, which just made crazy lighting. Like it was really bizarre, but that's what this bomb picture is. And it was hard to ever go to sleep because there was something crazy going on. And what's amazing with the auroras is how fast it can come and go. And you can see the most amazing show ever. 10 minutes later, it's gone. And if you didn't look out the window during that time, you would have missed it. Of course, the wildlife. Westfjords is known for the whale watching, and so one of the common tourism things to do is go whale watching. But you can also just see them from the side of the shore. And so the top left is a humpback whale that we imaged with my drone, and that's my daughter looking out at the same humpback whale. And this thing was in a narrow fjord. Like the fjord is only a mile across, and you can just watch these things come in and go. If you're into birds, tons of birds. Just amazing how much wildlife that was like for flying around. And then there's Arctic fox. And so the Arctic fox on the mainland of West Fjords are actually quite skittish because they're hunted. This was one chewing on, sorry for the gruesomeness, but that was used to be a seal. But if you go to Hornstander Natural Preserve, the fox have no predators, and they'll just like walk up to you, and they're quite cute. They're kind of derpy looking mammals. Watching ships, I used to like seeing what planes are going overhead, but then I installed the marine tracker on my flight, and it was just fun, like fun seeing what vessels were coming in, and the lighting was always different. It was amazing. The geothermal pools. I only took a picture of this one on the left, but we spent one day with one of my colleagues. We just biked around the fjord and went to geothermal pools. Well, that's an amazing day. This one on the right is by a little inn called Flokalunder and a campground, and it's like literally right on the ocean. I didn't stop it on this trip. I'd been there before. And then the winter activities, there's ski week. They take the groomer, they bring all the snow into downtown, and they do ski sprints right down the main street. And the kids are watching, the kids are competing. They've got their pro athletes competing. The whole town is out, and there's a band playing, and it's just a very festive atmosphere, which is quite amazing to see. Like once the sun peaks up from the mountains again, the town comes alive, and it's like, hey, let's celebrate. We survived a winter, and we're gonna do a lot of skiing. And then there's Fossvatngangan, which is the big cross country ski race. It's like the oldest cross country ski race in Iceland. And so I had to try that. I just did the short route. It's in North Dakota, cross country skiing is straightforward. It's flat. Not in Iceland, especially in Westfjords, there's like hills and stuff. And I broke a ski boot because I crashed and like ripped the front off. But I survived, and now I have a pair of skis. They're still in Iceland. I got to pick them up when I go in September, but that was a lot of fun. And then the music, like it's amazing how much music talent is in Iceland. This is Aldrei Freyjasúla, which basically means I never went south. It's like this big music festival that corresponds to Ski Week. Is circled. They televise it in Iceland. That's my daughter. She wanted to get there early and get on the front rail and watch everything, and everyone's just partying, and it's a fun atmosphere, and the music is great. Like there was a metal band, folk bands, rock bands, like very wide spectrum in music, and all of them were quite talented, and I'd love to go back again just for that. And then, oh yeah, I lived in Iceland. There's also the other country. And so it was crazy is like when you live in Westfjords and you don't really get out of there a lot, when you go to Reykjavik, am I going long? Okay. Five. Okay. Yep. So Reykjavik was just, it felt like another country. Like we go down there every once in a while for like a meeting or whatever. We'd see the cats at Reykjavik. Diego's one of the most famous ones. He actually got kidnapped while we were there, and it was a big, big drama. But luckily he was found and he's safe, and we saw him again, and he's living the good life. But yeah, it was weird, like being in the same country and feeling like you're going to a different country when you go down to the capital. So that's pretty much my presentation. I think overall. It was an amazing experience. I love the resiliency and the kindness of the residents. I thought North Dakota prepared us well. It made us used to the wind. Had no issues with temperatures because North Dakota gets quite cold. I was usually overdressed, or the Icelanders were always like, "How are you wearing so little?" I'm like, it's balmy out. This isn't a big deal. More limited shopping compared to US cities, but you get used to it. The changing seasons was wild, at its like peak, or I should say the biggest lack of sunshine in the middle of winter. We're just south of Arctic Circle, and so sunrise was after 12 p.m. Sunset was just a little after 2 p.m. The sun never got over the mountain though for like a couple months, so that was a little crazy. But when you do see the sun, it's a big deal, and everyone celebrates it. And so I felt that Westfjords took some of the stuff that we have in North Dakota and just took it to the next level. More limited shopping. The seasonality was crazy, but I thought both my daughter and I, we adapted well. I look forward to going back. I am going back. And more importantly, I encourage everyone to try and visit Westfjords, get off the ring road, check it out. You won't be sorry. It's an amazing place. So with that, thanks, and I'll take any questions.
This has been amazing, Aaron. Thank you so much. It sounds like an ideal place to be, actually. So, so when you go back, have you been designing new equipment that you're going to install and things like that?
Yeah, so basically, I've figured out which version of my instrument works the best, and so we left that one behind. And then what I'll be doing in my students is we'll be installing new heaters on the instrument to help melt some of the ice off. I'm convinced that Iceland offers a climate where it's going to be impossible to have the instrument working 100% of the time. But the goal is, if it does get iced over, the heaters can at least melt it off eventually, and then it recovers on its own instead of having to like go out there and chip the ice off or whatever.
All right. And you were there in the summer and in the winter now. And what was your biggest surprise in the difference between the two seasons?
It'd have to be the daylight. Like, during the summer, um, it's hard to like ever go to bed during the summer because you're busy doing things. And even when I was talking to some of the locals about like living there long term, they just said, well, we sleep less in the summer and we sleep more in the winter. And honestly, that's like not a bad strategy. Like in the winter, it was sometimes a little tough to get up in the morning, like when your alarm's going off at 7 or 8 or whatever, and it's pitch black, like literally seeing the northern lights on the way to work. That's kind of wild. Um, but yeah, North Dakota isn't quite that bad, but at least in North Dakota, we have parts of the winter where when I go to work, it's dark, and when I come back from work, it's dark. So not it's different, but it prepared me for that.
Okay. All right. Were there language classes available for you?
There are. I didn't take any formal classes. Most of what I learned is using an app called Tavik. And I think there's some articles about that. That'd actually be an interesting speaker for webinars, have them talk about the app they're building. But it's more like conversational based. If you're working there like permanently, all of the employers support taking language classes. We ended up doing like grammar lunch, and so the other international workers in the building with us, these are people, some came over after Brexit, some Americans, folks from Eastern Europe. Uh, we would just start going over like the different gender versions of words and all sort like I was learning more about English than I was maybe Icelandic because I was like, it's been a while since I've taken an English class, and it's it's a really tough language. It's something that I'm trying to practice still. I don't want to lose it because what I've gained I thought is useful, and what I liked is everyone seems to put an honest effort into trying to learn it, and I think that the locals appreciate that. Um, and yeah, like they had that group I mentioned that would have these functions for trying to learn it, like in a more conversational sense.
Well, when we were prepping for the class, you talked about the fact that many times you bike to work from Nifsdalur to Isafjordur. And so what was that like in the winter? Was
So
that
there's a bike path that goes from the two towns, and there were multiple people from my town that were biking to work in town. So I wasn't, so there was a lot of days I wasn't even the first tracks if it was fresh snow. But I learned that actually they would plow starting at 9 a.m. And so if we got a bunch of snow, and it was very common to get like a foot of snow or 6 inches of snow or whatever, which makes it very challenging to bike, that I was better off just waiting until a hair after 9 a.m. when the plow comes around and then bike in. So once you learn the habits of the locals and how they plow the road, then it was useful. Really, the toughest part was when that landslide happened and it made parts of it very muddy. And so there was a period where you'd actually just ride on the road, but there's really not that much traffic anyway. And if you have lights and stuff, it's overall a very safe place to ride your bike.
okay? Okay. Well, Aaron, thank you so much. This has been just a really, really pleasant educational presentation today. I thank you so much for it. And before we leave, I'd like to tell you what's on the INLUS calendar. So this Saturday, Minneota, Minnesota will be celebrating the 150th anniversary of Icelandic settlement. And that will be followed up right on its heels by the Deuce of August in Mountain, North Dakota on August 1st through the 3rd. The INLUS will be hosting a webinar with filmmaker Pamela Hogan and director Rappa Gunnarsdottir on the success of their film, The Day Iceland Stood Still, which documents the day women said enough and went on strike. The film is receiving international acclaim, and Pam and Rappa are excited to share an update. And that webinar will be Wednesday, August 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern. An interview with Eliza Reed will be the focus of a joint webinar with the Icelandic National League of North America and the INLUS on Wednesday, October 8th at 11 a.m. Eastern. Eliza is the former First Lady of Iceland and is also an accomplished author, and she will be talking about her books, both published and in the works. And tonight's presenter, Aaron, is an avid biker, if you didn't pick that up, and he has already biked across Iceland once, and is planning to do so again. So we're going to have him back in a couple of months to talk about what it's like to bike across Iceland and through the Highlands and how to plan a trip like that. So stay tuned for more information there. And in fact, information on all our upcoming events can be found on the INLUS events calendar. So again, Aaron, thank you so much for sharing your research and your feelings for the Westfjords. It looked like you had a great gig, and I wish you a lot of luck in going back and continuing your research there. And for today's attendees, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your support. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.